And tonight we had our we had our night for the good. Someone is recording. We had our meeting tonight, and a couple things that came out just to throw at everyone. So one of the key priorities for the school board is the compensation package that's being considered in terms of elevating salaries across the different scales and steps and whatnot. Provided some context for that. One of the other things that she really talked about was the current budget from the outgoing governor, and if enacted, it would provide some additional revenue across the board for schools. Probably, her estimate was to the tune of about 10 million or so that would be available to Arlington public schools as part of this expanded budget from the state if it's adopted. That remains to be seen. And a couple of the committee chairs, some of the things that came out. FAC is also looking very closely at the enrollment projections, like we will next month in our meeting, and just really to see the impact on facilities, the continued build out or not, as it's necessary for for the system. And then kind of that final piece, and I'll talk to the Special Education Advisory Committee chair, trying to talk to him next Wednesday, but just some thoughts that they had on budgetary impacts of elevating resources within the special education community. The kids that we have that kind of fit in those needs, just with the last 2 years and how far back, everyone kind of slid. But what additional resources to allow the the kids that have special education needs to recover from the previous couple of years, and a look at perhaps in their view some of the outdated planning factors that go into how we align special education resources. So can't say I'm terribly smart on that, but I'll meet with him next Wednesday, and we may add that onto the agenda for February going into the budget review in March. That probably wouldn't be a bad topic to have, and at least get their perspective as a committee, what they see in terms of budgetary needs for that population of students within the system. Outside of that, we'll go ahead and move on to the approval of the December minutes. Does anyone have any comment before we vote? Okay, if not, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Motion to approve the minutes from last month.
Okay, and is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all right, all those in favor, go ahead and raise your hand virtually. Okay, and motion carries. All right, we will now go ahead and transition to public comment. Josh, as always, we'll let you lead off.
So, hi everybody. Real brief, because I've talked about this on just budgetary impacts of things, compensation. I'm also chair of ACTC, the Arlington Committee on Transportation Choices. So fancy meeting you here, Chuck. It's been what, an hour and a half?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but of course, here I'm representing the AEA, and just that we're waiting on the on the compensation part to see how that's going to be integrated in the budget. $33.7 million, which you're going to understand is a whole presentation on. So I won't pontificate too much right now, except to say that it's staffing, even outside of COVID issues, are a challenge. And so with COVID, and we're seeing even within education, people rethinking what they're doing, being extremely competitive in the market is vital. And as we see districts around us that are competing at the same level of pay, but their housing stock is more affordable. It lends more credence to the challenges we face here in Arlington when it comes to compensation. So that's probably our big focus right now as it relates to budget issues. Obviously, AEA members have health and safety concerns right now. But those aren't really in this committee's purview. So with that, I say thank you, Chuck. Next month, we'll probably have more to talk about. And if you need me to just say anything out of ACTC at any point, let me know.
All right, thank you. Any other members of the public?
Yes, hi. Okay,
Yep.
I'm
Go
on
ahead.
wait a second, I'm gonna take off. I'm struggling here, okay. Well, let's just turn this one off. Okay, now can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm on two devices because I can't. Let me just, I'm gonna turn off this one here. I know, I turned off one. I couldn't, I'm now just on my cell phone, okay? Can you see, you can't see me on my cell phone.
I see you now, but I can't hear you.
Yep, gotcha.
I was muted, now I'm not unmuted. And I'm leaving the other one. There we go. Sorry about that, guys, here we go.
All right, go ahead.
Good. Yeah, there we are. We're good. Yeah, I think this is the right place to go. And I just wanted, I've been very interested in the budget. My background is in accounting and all that. And so this is something that I've just been following. And I just had a question, or maybe, I don't even know if it's a question or a comment about some of the stuff that I've seen. And I just wanted to sort of throw it out there. And I don't know what you guys can do with it, or if it's something that this falls within your purview anyway. But I've been really watching the ARP stuff, the American Rescue Plan, and I just had a question. Well, I know that APS had to resubmit their documents, the ARP document, because there was just a mistake. Some columns were inverted. But when they did it, they left it largely the same. So they resubmitted it in December. And then also in December, I watched the board meeting in December, and there are some, I guess there's some CARES Act money that is coming as part of the closeout. So in the final fiscal status report. And I guess my question is any of the ARP money in the final fiscal status report? And is that money then going to be spent in other years? If any of the ARP money is in the final fiscal status report, haven't we already spent it, or aren't we all supposed to spend it on things that we've already targeted, virtual learning, summer school, some of the math coaches, that type of thing? So if ARP money is in that $18 million or so, that's the CARES Act, but it's supposed to be targeted for other things, how can we spend it for the things that are listed in page 9 and 10 of the presentation that the board saw on December 16th? So that's just my question. I was walking through, again, my background's forensic accounting, and so I watch these things. I know money's fungible, but that's just a question I had, and I just wanted to raise it with you guys. I don't know what you can do with that, but that's all I have to say as a parent and a member of the public. I just wanted to raise that issue.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Chuck,
Leslie.
I just want to say I
Yeah.
will address that when we get to the final fiscal.
Okay. All right, thank you, Leslie. All right, I guess, we'll move on now to school board update. And so I guess, in a roundabout way, we will welcome back Christina Diaz-Torres, although in a, different role than we are accustomed to with her previous membership on the BAC. So Christina, floor is yours.
Super. And I saw that I'm on the agenda for 10 minutes, but I'm definitely not going to take 10 whole minutes. But I am super excited to be coming back to the BAC. For those of you I didn't have the pleasure of serving with, I was on the BAC for 3 years and change prior to joining the school board. And it's really kind of where I got my understanding of how our budget works and how we allocate money here in APS. It was a really enriching experience for me in developing my own leadership and figuring out how to lead the school system. And it's something that I can consistently refer back to as I'm now serving. At a high level, without going too far into the weeds, into what Leslie's going to be presenting, I think the key headline that I have been taking away as of late is that we are in a better position than we might have anticipated being, but we are certainly not in the clear. We are looking at a fiscal outlook overall that is positive. We saw some pretty robust closeout in December that the board approved, that Leslie's going to take you through in detail, that is going to help us, but it's certainly not a complete saving grace. And so as we are looking forward into this budget season, it's important for us to remember that things are still very uncertain. As someone has already alluded to, the budget coming from or Dr. Cannon alluded to in the meeting, the budget from the governor is unclear. That is still going to be pending. We have no idea what that's going to look like. We heard some campaign promises in the fall about some pretty significant school spending, so we'll see if that pans out. But in that lack of certainty, we need to remain cautious. And so Leslie is always our steadfast leader on that front. And so I'm excited for you all to get some exposure to what it was that we saw back in December. And I'm just very excited to be back to join this wonderful team, to gather all of your feedback, report it back out to my colleagues, and to work with you all as you're generating your feedback on the overall budget. That was not 10 minutes, but Chuck, that's what I got.
Okay. Anyone have questions for Christina?
So this is Juan Gordon. I don't have a question, but glad to see you, Christina, and I look forward to working with you again.
Hi, Juan. Great to see you.
All right. Any other questions, comments for Christina? Okay. We'll transition to the next part. The kind of the key thing every year around this time is budget. The closeout of the previous fiscal year. So Leslie's going to walk us through all the numbers in detail. So obviously important to understand, the unique times that we're in, and how that, would happen this previous year in terms of closeout, may be a bit of an anomaly. And I know Leslie has some historical perspective on what has happened in the past versus now. But important to just understand, I think, when she takes us through this, where things stand and, where the closeout funds are going to be redirected, and how that's going to set up for what we will see here at the end of next month when the superintendent delivers the budget. So without further ado, Leslie, over to you for the closeout.
Thanks, Chuck. I'm going to share my screen. Excuse me. And I'm going to run through very quickly the presentation that was given at the December 16th school board meeting on the closeout. Excuse me. We call it closeout. It's the final fiscal status report. It gives the board the last report of the year on how we did with the fiscal year versus with our revenues and expenditures. Obviously, this is done after the financial records are closed and we've received our audit report. We also do this after we send our annual school report to the Department of Ed. And overall for this year, as many of you know, we have $62.1 million available for reallocation. We have 5 funds that we look at to see if there are ending balances that would be available for carry forward. And 4 out of those 5 funds did have balances, some negative, some positive, but overall net, we have $58.7 million available from operations, most of it coming from the school operating fund, which you might expect because it is, of course, the largest fund that we have. We have 2 other funds where we carry forward the ending balances to those funds. Food and Nutrition Services, which is a self-supporting fund, and all funds must accrue back to that fund by law. And then we have the Grants and Restricted Programs Fund, which is made up of individual grants. Some are federal, some are state, some are a combination, some are private. And especially with the federal grants, the fiscal year for those is not the same as our fiscal year. So we have grants that extend through September. And so we carry forward all of the funding for grants and restricted programs into the Grants and Restricted Programs Fund so that they can continue that process. Excuse me. On the county revenue side, we did receive an additional almost $1.8 million based on our 47% share of the county's locally generated tax revenue. But in doing so, we also have to contribute to the general fund reserve, and the county maintains that reserve at 5.5% of operating expenses. So if the budget goes up, then of course the general fund reserve would necessarily go up, and we have to ensure that we're contributing our portion to the general fund reserve. So that was $1.2 million. And then in addition, we have $2.8 million of funding that was appropriated by the county to us, but that we didn't include in our FY21 budget. So that means that the county gave it to us. We don't have it anywhere on our books right now because we didn't include it in the budget and we didn't put it into the reserves. So it's available to be reallocated in some way at this point. And so the net result is an increase to us of about $3.4 million. In summary, among those things, the savings from operations, the additional county revenue, and then the additional county appropriation, we have $62.1 million available. I was showing the school board what their reserve picture looked like. I wanted to remind them of where we stood after using a number of the reserves for balancing the FY22 budget before we went into recommendations. And so the recommendations for using that $62.1 million is shown here. $16.85 million to be added to the compensation reserve. This is based on the compensation study recommendations, which call for an increase of $33.7 million. This is half of that. We have an addition to the debt service reserve of $2 million. We know that we will have debt service increases coming up. So this will help us defray 50% of that cost over a period of time. Calculated here is 3 years based on the previous CIP. That could change with the next CIP that will be approved in June. And then adding $28.2 million to the future budget years reserve, which has been the reserve that we've taken a lot of the funding for budgets in the past to help us balance them. And then we do have some needs in the current year of about $15 million. And those I'm going to talk about next. As I said, we have some needs in FY22. Some of these needs are things that we have either promised or have already done or are already doing in the current year. There are some one-time expenditures and some ongoing expenditures. So things that are being done right now or have already been done that are one-time expenditures are the first group. And of course, you all know about the one-time bonus for staff that went out in December. That was approved by the school board based on using closeout funds. So we've included that here. We needed additional staff to help monitor outdoor lunch. Charter buses for high school and middle school athletics because transportation has not been able to provide those buses timely. They say because everybody has runs in the afternoon, they say they can't get to the schools until 4:30 to be able to take students to any athletic practices or games. And in many cases, students need to leave the school much earlier than that. And so we have to charter buses for that. The planetarium needs a new projector when it reopens, so we will be spending about $220,000 for that. And then the integration station program, which is co-located with the children's school, will be moving from its current Ballston location to the newly constructed location on Langston Boulevard, and we expect that to happen sometime this spring. So those funds are for that move. And those are all one-time expenditures. This is the only year that we expect to see those expenditures. In the next session, we have ones that are similar in the sense that they're either things that we've already done or that we're currently doing, but they're ongoing expenditures and will affect the FY23 budget and going forward. So in the fall, in order to attract more subs, we increased substitute pay. And I think everyone heard about the new Amazon Think Lab at Wakefield, which requires someone to oversee it. So we've added a person for that. We started the new family information line at the beginning of the school year this year, and we will be continuing that into upcoming years. And then we currently have screeners at Syfax, and this will continue. We will continue to have, and Syfax is our central office location. We will continue to have someone at the front door to greet folks and direct them in the right direction, and just be a presence on that first floor that we haven't had in the past. And I think there's also some discussion around security because there are a lot of spaces that can be gotten to very, very easily, very quickly, especially if there's no one right there at the front door. So those items are there and will continue into future budget years. And then we have some things that we haven't done yet that we're requesting funds for. The first two line items are directly related to the school board's priorities of numeracy and literacy. So there's some additional curriculum resources for reading, writing, and math. We are also requesting some funding to get our Oracle ERP project underway. We would like to hire the consultant to start getting what the requirements are from everyone and helping us put together the RFP with all of the specifications and whatnot. And then we also need a consultant to help us put out our RFP for health insurance that we will be doing in the next year because that contract needs to be redone and rebid, and that is not something that our HR staff can do. So those are all the items that we need funding for in the current year. The total is about $15 million. And then this just shows what the reserves would look like once this is approved by the school board, if it's approved the way that it's been recommended. And then those funds, those reserves would be available for the FY23 budget and beyond as needed, as necessary. Did we want to go into the CIP quarterly report, or did we just want to talk about the fiscal piece?
It may be helpful,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. All right, so then we also have, as part of this report, our CIP quarterly report, and it's just a wrap up of the fourth quarter for the CIP. And the CIP has two parts to it. It has our major construction, which is, all the big projects that we do, and then our minor construction, major maintenance, or you might have heard it called MCMM. Sometimes it's called PAYGO. And those are the smaller projects that are included in the annual budget rather than the 10-year CIP, the traditional 10-year CIP. And you can see the budgets, how much we've expended or committed, and then what the balances are as of June 30th of each year. This provides an overview of all of the major construction projects that we have online right now and what their status is, where they are with budget and where they are with expenditures and commitments. What I will say is that sometimes the budget doesn't reflect the entire budget of the project because we don't put that all in at the same time. Sometimes because we haven't sold the bonds for it yet, and sometimes because we haven't requested those funds out of the bond funding for the project. So that's where we are with major construction. And then on minor construction, major maintenance, we had 87 projects, of which 75% were completed by June 30. A lot of the projects that we have in MCMM, we have in the budget. We know that we're not going to be doing it in that budget year, but we need the funds in order to start, ordering things, like especially with HVAC. But with other things, we need lead time to order, and then the projects get completed over the summer, of course, which is when schools are most available for these kinds of things to take place. So we expect that most of those projects will be completed by the mid-year report, which you'll be seeing in February. And we have our reserves. We have a MCMM reserve, we have a major construction reserve, and then of course the capital reserve, which you just saw. Right, that's it for the presentation, and now I am happy to answer questions. I know that I got some questions prior to the meeting tonight, and so I'm going to go through those and answer those, and then I'll put it out there for questions from anybody else. Does that work?
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
All right. All right, let me turn my camera on. Explain more about the $2.9 million financing proceeds for computers. Is this a one-time gain or will it be ongoing? And talk about how we are paying and financing computers. That's a good question. So what we do is we actually purchase all of our computers up front. And then we work with the county, who has like a short-term line of credit, to finance the computers. So instead of paying, $6 million lump sum in 1 year, we pay a certain amount over the next 3 years. So we could buy $6 million in purchases this year. We get $6 million in financing proceeds back. And then next year, we'll start paying on that, that loan or that line of credit that we have from the county because we're financing these computers. So this is something that happens every year. we have our what we call lease payments in the finance budget. I think it's about $4 million right now, maybe a little bit more. I don't remember. I haven't looked at that line item in a while. But this is something that we do every year. So we buy all the computers. They belong to us. They are not leased. They are purchased outright, and then we use a financing vehicle, this short-term line of credit from the county, to finance the cost over 3 years. Second question, extended day, $5.4 million against budget and against expenses. Will our eventual return to normal put this back in balance? Yes, God, I hope so. That is the goal. The follow-up question is the program supposed to be self-funding? We attempt to have it be self-funding. It has been self-funding over the last several years, which is great. And that is our goal, to keep it that way. But of course, in the current environment, it's very difficult to do that. So we're just seeing how it goes for this year. But hopefully when we're back to whatever normal would be considered to be, hopefully next year, it will be back. Number 3, debt service. I understand the county places the debt, but for looking ahead, should we be worried about interest rate increases? Does our debt carry variable interest rates? Very good question. The county does place our debt, and they go to the bond market when they do so. We've been very, very fortunate in the last several years that our bond rates have been somewhere between like 2 and 2.8%, which is great. It's been very helpful to us. We've paid a lot less debt service than we had anticipated. Of course, we're worried about rate increases. I mean, who wouldn't be, with all the talk of the Fed increasing interest rates several times this year. But when we do our calculations of what debt service is going to be on projects that are upcoming, so when I do this, when I do all the calculations for the CIP in the spring, we use a 5% debt interest rate to calculate that debt service. So we're pretty much hedging our bets on that, right? We're projecting that the interest rate's going to be high, and then if it comes in lower, then that just means that we have savings either in the budget or in the future on the interest rate, on the interest and the debt service for that debt. We do not have variable interest rates. We have one interest rate. The debt itself can be structured to have, higher payments here and lower payments there, but it's not a variable interest rate. It is a non-variable interest rate, whatever that word is. Sorry, I can't think of it. All right. The next question is big shortfall in carrying out capital projects. Was that a one-time problem of pandemic and supply chain interruptions? I see the major maintenance projects did pretty well in being executed, while some of our other large projects seem on the slow path. Career Center. The picture that you see is very emblematic of every year that we do this report. We have a lot of major construction projects that are still out there. We have MCMM projects that haven't been completed and that carry over into the following year. Very, very, very normal. This is well in line with where we've been in the last 3 to 5 years. And then let's see. All right. Let's talk about the Federal CARES Act revenue of $18.4 million that everybody seems to be very, very interested in. The $18.4 million in CARES Act revenue that was on attachment 3 was from the coronavirus relief funds and from the ESSER 2 grant funds that we received last year, and that we had a number of items earmarked from our budget for that revenue. That revenue has been spent. We are going through the reimbursement process right now of all of the things that we spent last year that we said we would use those specific funds for, the CRF funds and the ESSER2 funds. That $18.4 million has absolutely nothing to do with the $18.9 million from ARPA that we have in the FY22 budget. We have already spent all of the $18.4 million that is under that Federal CARES Act revenue line in attachment 3 of the closeout report. We used it for a number of things. We used it for PPE, for cleaning supplies, for HVAC infiltration, for bus drivers, to pay people to keep them on board so that they, were still employed, for some administrative expenses, for distance learning, things to facilitate distance learning. Any number of things that were allowable expenditures under both the CRF and ESSER2 guidelines. That's what we used. That's what we used the $18.4 million for. So we have spent that money. It was spent last year in FY21, and we're getting reimbursed for that. As I said, that's completely separate from the $18.9 million from ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funds that we have in the FY22 budget. That grant, those funds, we did apply and we had to fix the application, and that's been revised and that's in at the state. And we have specific expenditures that are delineated for those funds, and those can be found on our website. I think everybody knows where that is. And so that's a very separate amount of money from the $18.4 million that was in the operating fund from last year from CARES Act. All right, so that's all I have on closeout, the questions that I have on closeout. So if there are any follow-ups or additional questions, I'm happy to take those.
Hi, Leslie. This is Juan Gordon.
Juan, just a minute. Juan, please raise your hand. And that way I can take people in the order that they want to.
Right. Jennifer, go ahead.
Which they are asking questions. Sorry, can't talk tonight. Jennifer, you are number one on my list.
Leslie, thank you for that. Actually, I kind of just wanted to make sure I understand. Thank you for clarifying what comes from CARES and ESSER and ARP, and just by way of reference, like I work for Congress. I work for the Congressional Budget Committee I work for the Budget Committee that enacted ARP. So I've been following this very closely myself too, because that was my life for so many months. And just when I had gone to the Virginia Department of Education website to see what APS was receiving from these 3 different federal vehicles, the very good website that they had, it looked like that APS was receiving about $8 million from CARES, had received about $8 million from CARES, had received about $2 million-ish from CARES, $8 million-ish from CRRSA, and then with the largest tranche of money coming from ARP. But I hear you saying differently that actually we got a much more than what at least the Virginia Department of Education documents that are online suggested. Is that correct?
Right, because we got $7.5 million in CRF funds from the county.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So there was the CARES Act that came from the Virginia Department of Education through those bills that came directly to the schools, but then there was the additional funding that got filtered from the county. Right. I understand what you're saying. So that's why we see such a large balance for CARES Act funding, even though it wasn't.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That's why it's 18.4 million rather than what you might have thought. That is not a balance.
I understand that.
That is just a delineation of all the different types of revenue that we received. On attachment 3, it says, this is all the revenue we received.
Got it. And that CARES Act funding, it's not
still
just
sitting there.
it.
It's just, here's the revenue side, here's the expenditure side.
Understood.
Balance at the end of the day is
Okay.
the 62.1 million.
That what I was trying to understand was that disconnect between what I see in the Virginia Department of Ed data, and that's yes, of course, the county got funding too that they also provided. Then I understand. I understand what that CARES Act. Thank you, Leslie.
Sure. All right.
Other questions?
Juan, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? There you go.
Yes, I have one question. Thank you very much, Leslie, for your report tonight. And I wanted to ask, looking back over the past few years, I know we've borrowed funding from the reserves. Is any consideration in this year's budget to replenish some of those funds back to the reserves, which were borrowed in the last few years?
Yes, that's what's shown on one of the slides in the presentation. I'm going to pull that up again, since you've asked the question. So here is the recommendations for what to do with the closeout funds. We have $62.1 million in funds available, right at the top. And then the first 3 items that you see are to go into the reserves. So 16.85 million to go to the compensation reserve, 2 million to the debt service reserve, 28.2 million to the future budget years reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? That can't be the only questions. Come on. All right, Chuck.
Probably would be helpful, based on the pre-meet that you, Eric, and I had, kind of talk about, when you look at closeout and the target, sort of what's your expectation year to year about how much of the previous budget you expect, as a target to get back, and just, maybe a little bit of history about how this is really an anomaly compared to your previous experience. I think just be helpful for some historical perspective for the group.
Sure. So at the end of the year, what we'd like to see is anywhere between 3 and 5% of our budget as closeout. Our budget's around $700 million. That means that we'd like to have somewhere between $21 million and $35 million available in closeout at the end of the year. That's a best practice. We've been pretty steady over the last, how far back did I go? 9 years? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, 9 years. 19 and 18 were the smallest years we've ever had, and they were $8.4 and $9.3 million in closeout. And the rest of the time, we've been in the like $17 to $27 million range, which is pretty good. It's where I'd really like to see us be most of the time. This was a big anomaly, mainly because we had a difficult time with, just figuring out all the different moving parts of what was going on with our budget, with revenue coming in. We also were lucky in that some of the revenue that came in paid for things that were already in our base budget rather than things that we had to add on top of our budget, like all of the PPE and cleaning supplies and that kind of thing. We were able to pay for some of the things that were in the base budget, like bus drivers and extended day workers and all of that. So that helped us a lot. So this was an anomaly. I do not expect to see this ever again, because I hope we never have a situation like this again. And we want to keep to that 3 to 5% best practice at the end of the year. Jennifer.
Thank you. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for this helpful presentation. I'm super excited about the curriculum investments. This is kind of a question for you and Christina. I know that this plan has to be presented to the board, how we're going to spend the funds, and how we're going to spend this closeout. And I think perhaps maybe it's a question sort of more for her. You know, as you are maybe aware, Leslie, I mean, there's been a huge parent volunteer effort to try to get better PPE for teachers with, you know, like I made a Venmo donation, others made Venmo donations. I love that it was actually satirized in a McSweeney's article about de facto government agencies and communities providing PPE to teachers. And but anyways, all that's just to say is, as we look at what the current needs are and having better PPE for teachers and for students who want higher quality masks that are just hard to pay for on a daily basis, is the school board thinking about how to add an additional, how to spend some of this closeout funding to provide for those needs so that both staff and students don't have to bear those additional costs. And I say this, my family literally just spent $300 this week buying better quality masks and rapid tests, right? Like, and that's really something that in the school setting, the school, that's what these federal funds were provided for, right? That's why Congress provided $180 billion over 3 federal acts to schools, was to help them keep safely open and to address learning loss. So I kind of am curious if we'll see any revised plans or thoughts to provide that going forward.
Yeah, Leslie, I can start this one, and then if I miss something or I misspeak, feel free to cut in. So we heard in the last, this is not this week's weekly update, but the previous weekly update in last week's board meeting, that we are purchasing, I believe they're N95 masks. They might be KN95 masks, so don't quote me on whether it's the K or the N. And we are purchasing, I think it's 200 some odd thousand rapid antigen tests. The issue is the supply chain, and we're waiting on getting them in, and we knew that some of the masks are going to be coming in as soon as last Friday, and we know that some have started getting distributed to schools, but it's just getting them in the quantities that we need them is what's happening right now. Leslie, you correct me if I'm wrong, but we're using a mix of different fundings, is my understanding, of line items and potential funding sources to be able to pay for this, to ensure that we can do this. We're hoping, and this was spoken about in the last board meeting, but we're hopeful that numbers will hopefully track similar to in Africa and in the UK and in other countries, and we're going to start to see a decline so that we don't need to engage in some in ongoing additional purchase of 250,000 some odd rapid antigen tests every single month, because that will end up becoming a very, very large expense very, very quickly. But we are pursuing that right now, and we are continuing to monitor as we go along to see what the need is going to be. Leslie, anything I missed there that you want to add?
Not a thing. Doing good.
Jennifer, does that answer your question?
It does. Yep. I mean, I think I'm going to guess that both. Unfortunately, I think we'll see what happens with rapid tests, but I suspect that that people are still going to be wanting masks going on, and hopefully it's more than just like one mask per teacher that has to last them for a while. So hopefully those are real investments to help satisfy their safety concerns.
Yeah, I mean and I will reiterate what Christina said about these supply chain issues. I mean, we can order 10 million masks. We're not going to get 10 million masks. We're just not. We've been having severe supply chain issues with food, with supplies, for our construction projects and whatnot. So it's been really frustrating for us, and I know it's been frustrating for families. Would we like to give every teacher and every employee in the school district, an unlimited supply of N95 masks? Yes. Can we? No. but we're doing our best. We're going to try and give them what we can as we can.
And I think as this is a really great case study in our collaboration with the, because we have the mutual aid agreement with each other in these kinds of purchases, and it's actually been better for us to purchase en masse, and they have been incredibly collaborative on this point of assisting us and getting what we need, and then we've assisted them as well. So this has been a good point of that collaboration.
Thanks.
Chuck, you have a question? Sorry, Jennifer.
Leslie, kind of circling back on maybe the expenditures portion of closeout. One of the lines in the report talked about salary lapse. We know we have, some degree of staffing shortages. Can you speak to how significant staffing shortages are, its contribution to obviously having to pay less in terms of salary and benefits? And do you see that trend continuing looking into the next year, or, I guess what the view is about the hiring environment on those shortages?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So the salary lapse that we had last year is going to be a very different type of salary lapse than what we have this year. Because we didn't have the same kinds of staffing shortages last year that we do this year. So, I suspect that we'll have a healthy lapsed salary this year. It will be difficult to tell until later in the year where exactly that might be. Will that continue? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think one of the reasons that the school board and the superintendent are very anxious to implement the recommendations from the compensation study is that, it puts us in a better place against the market. So that gives us, a leg up from where we are right now, and hopefully that will help. But, I don't know. I think if we have another year like this year, next year, I think it's going to not just be us that sees lots of staff shortages, as we are currently seeing. It's going to be all over the place, and it could be even worse. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you hear about it in other industries. Any sense how we compare to, our staffing challenges with some of the surrounding counties? Is there any sense, are we sort of on par with everyone? Are we kind of seeing it all equally that you're aware of? Or Christina, if either one of you could comment.
Anecdotally, I think we're right where everyone else is. Everybody else is having, central office people going out to the schools to cover classes and, all of the other things. So, Christina, you may have had more discussions with your colleagues than I.
Yeah, I was on the phone with a couple of other Northern Virginia school board members over the last couple of days. Exact same problem. Trying to fill in holes everywhere. Have multiple staff members and administrators filling in classrooms where they can. And I think showing some love and appreciation really to our principals who are trying to make this work and fix a gigantic puzzle that is constantly changing, and they're getting new information constantly. They're going through a lot this week, and so any appreciation that can be sent to them will be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, and that's Melanie just threw up a point as a follow-up. I'd heard that substitute teachers as well was a really critical shortage. And I know I think we showed we have done some things to address a higher pay rate for. In fact, I think I got a flyer myself. Hey, if you want to be an APS sub, not sure I want to jump into that teaching kids, but Any thoughts there? I know money is part of it, but I think there's also just broadly in the economy, a little bit of, I'm not sure how much I buy into what they term the Great Resignation, but it certainly does show up. So I guess any thoughts there or things we can look at as a BAC on that particular aspect before we kind of jump into the compensation study?
I think something to remember is that the educator workforce was already tight before the pandemic. It's not that we had a surplus of qualified and trained teachers. Like, yes, we had enough and we were always able to hire competitively, but it's not that we had 50 applications for a single job. The supply and the demand were just not, the supply was not completely outpacing the demand in a dramatic way. And so then when the pandemic hit and everyone is suddenly faced with different choices and different options in front of them, even with our increase to our sub hourly rates, we are doing as much to promote them, but the pool is just dry. And we are getting creative, and we are advertising, and we are doing outreach, and our HR folks are going out there and communicating as much as they can. We include it in the weekly emails this week, in fact, I believe, to both staff and to families. And please, if you know anyone who would like to sub, we need subs. But the pool is dry, and so we are trying to get as creative as we possibly can.
Sal.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a quick question to Christina on this subs question. I know it's a little off the budgetary and financial discussion, but is the county or is the school board able to process applications for substitutes on a timely basis? One anecdote is my younger sister, who lives in Alexandria, was trying to get in with Fairfax, and it's like almost talking to a wall because a lot of interest. I think there's a lot of legitimate people trying to apply, but the county's not able to keep up. I just want to hear about Arlington's efforts there.
My understanding is the backlog is that we don't actually have a backlog from our side. The backlog tends to end up being background checks because those are done and verified externally, or done with an outside vendor as well and verified with an outside vendor. And so those sometimes take a long time in order to finish processing the paperwork. They're working as quickly as they possibly can as well. But Sal, to answer your question directly, we haven't heard of any major hiccups in that in the last month or so.
Got it. Thank you.
Other questions or comments reference the closeout report? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and transition to discussion on the compensation study. And I know this has been a multi-year running effort. So, back to Leslie to talk to us about kind of where things stand. And I think probably for us, understanding where this is going to head for the 23 budget that we'll see here at the end of next month.
Sure. I'm not going to do the presentation that was provided to the school board on December 9. I would not do it justice in the least. But there is a presentation, is a good presentation for you to look at. And basically what the design of the compensation study or the compensation changes, recommendations is to what the goals of that study is to provide compensation that is market competitive and internally equitable, that is consistent, that has consistent and predictable pay growth. We have scales that have hold steps or frozen steps. We also have some scales that have very short, topping out. So, you can be here, I don't know, something like 13 years and be completely topped out at the end of that, even if you have a 20-year career with us. And then, very importantly, that it be financially sustainable. So those are the three goals of the compensation. There are new pay scales that are being proposed. And so the scales are being redesigned such that on the teacher, administrator, and professional pay scales, which are TP and E scales, that the starting rates are set near the top of APS's primary competitors for talent. It eliminates any longevity or hold steps. It has consistent graduated step increases, and then it ensures that there's promotional pay growth from the teacher scale to the administrator scale. And what that means is, if you're a teacher and you're like, hey, I might want to be an assistant principal, and then you go to the assistant principal pay scale and you look at it, you probably think there's no way I'm going to go be an assistant principal because I have to work 12 months and I'm not going to be getting any, if any more than I'm currently getting as a teacher, when you compare it. So there's been an issue with that. So that's one of the things it's fixing. On the support staff side, we had retirement eligible and non-eligible staff. So they were receiving different amounts of pay. So there's going to be parity that is going to be built into the scale now. We are increasing our starting rates to align with our competitors. We're going to have consistent graduated step increases, and we're going to expand the number of steps. As I said, some of those scales only had, 13 steps on them. So we're going to expand the number of steps so people have, a place to go throughout their career. One of the things that this recommended implementation approach also does is it restores steps that were not granted in 4 separate years, 2011, 2013, 2015, and 2020. So if you have been if you've been here and you missed all 4 of those steps, and you haven't, moved to another job or something, then you will get all of those steps as well. So at the end of the day, when we look at all of the scales and what moving everybody to the new scale does, it's a total cost of $33.7 million. Most of it, of course, for the TP and E scales, because teachers are the biggest portion of our workforce. Of course, they would cost the largest amount. Happy to answer any questions. It was a very, very, very short overview of what's in that compensation study, but I think if we discuss it and ask questions about it, we'll touch on a lot of the different things. Eric, you had a question.
Thank you, Leslie. So how are we measuring the financial stability piece of this? If it increases costs by 33 million, and we know that our compensation costs are 90% of our operating budget, are we just simply trying to forecast out based on the current set of resources what the cost will be over the next 5 years and see whether that matches in with projected revenue growth? Or I guess how are we going to measure? How are we going to evaluate the financial stability longer term?
Well, one of the things that we looked at is what a step costs, right? So right now, a step costs around $12 million. And when we looked at what a step increase will cost with the new salary scale, it was quite a bit less. I think it was about 8.5, which, you know, is certainly a much smaller number in comparison to what it currently costs us to provide a step increase. That's one of the things that we're looking at for financial sustainability. But one of the bigger things, two major components of this is making sure that our scales are competitive with the market, getting rid of those hold steps, and shoot, just lost it. And bringing everybody up to speed that missed steps in the past. So those are the big things, I think, around this compensation study that are really big pieces that, you know, don't necessarily speak to financial sustainability, but knowing that we're going to be market competitive is very helpful. Fixing our salary scales so that we can easily remain market competitive just by providing, you know, a COLA. Because right now our salary scales are a little bit, I don't want to say messed up, but they're not in the best shape, and they need to be fixed. And this fixes that, and that makes being able to change the scale to make it more market competitive by providing a COLA when everyone else is providing a COLA and bringing our scales up to match theirs. It makes it a lot easier for us. Yeah, I'll stop there. Any follow-ups?
Yeah, well, then just a quick follow-up question. So, you know, there's always a big there's always a big to-do about when reports come out and it shows the cost per student for what APS spends per student, especially relative to some of our other, you know, surrounding districts. Are we looking at that as a measure as well to see what that potentially becomes over time?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not sure that the school board is looking at that. Christina, you may have insights on that. That's not something that we're looking at as a measure.
Okay, because that's always one that just the community discussions always pops up as the first thing that people are like, how are we spending that much money relative to other school districts? It's going to come up, and I assume people are going to know, well, how does this impact that that metric?
It's a good question.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to increase it. There's no other way around it, right? We have a certain number of students. If our budget goes up such that we're spending $33.7 million more for compensation, absolutely it's going to change our cost per pupil. The question is, what are we going to get rid of in order to bring the cost per pupil down? Because we've got what it means then is that we have to change the way we are delivering our services so that we can reduce the number of people that we have on staff, because that is the only way that we're going to change that cost per pupil.
Or change the pyramid of our people, right? We have more lesser experienced people and paying them a relatively lower pay rate than people who've been around maybe 20 years and are higher in the pay scale, right? That's the other way, is a pyramid solution.
Right. Yes, we could say to longer lived teachers that, and I'm just saying yes as an example, this is not something that I am advocating. I want to make this very clear right now before anybody goes off and says anything. Leslie said, no, this is just an example. Yes, we could say to 30-year teachers, 30 years, you're done, we don't want you anymore. Go retire or go work somewhere else. 25 years, 20 years, whatever that number is, and then hire in new staff. Yes, we could absolutely do that. Do we want to do that? That would be a question for the school board.
Yep. Okay.
Chuck, I think you're next.
Yeah, so you mentioned the 33.7 million increase that would come from enacting the recommendations in the compensation study. Half of that is going to come from the previous briefing. Half of that's going to come from carryover from closeout. And then I'm assuming the other half would be just baked in the proposed budget for this year. Knowing that if we have some kind of carryover each year, you know, some of that is going to roll back from closeout in the previous year. I guess where the question is going, I don't see anything in the study yet that speaks to future cost of living adjustment methodologies. And I know we've talked about different ways we could look at that. Can you speak to COLA in the future as it relates to this aspect of compensation?
I do not believe that there have been any recommendations regarding COLA from the compensation study. So I would be hesitant to say anything about how we would look at COLA. I think that is a school board decision as to how they want to approach that.
Sure. And then if I could put Christina on the spot a bit, because I know she's been in some of these discussions we've had. Is there, I guess, hesitancy because of the uncertainty of where, you know, the future may lie with revenue and things of that nature? But obviously, you know, we hear it enough through the teachers. I know Josh is a big advocate, at least publicly with us, about, you know, coming up with some way to index to cost of living, because it is a, you know, especially in Arlington, and, you know, housing in particular is a massive challenge to having a workforce that lives in the county. Thoughts there, or is this just something that we really need to continue to study or find some way to come up with a sustainable way to look at that problem?
Yeah, this is an incremental approach where we can't do all of the things all at once. And so the compensation study provided us an initial path forward, but we have been clear that that is certainly not the only change that may be necessary in our budget in future years. We have not had a robust conversation, and this would likely come up as part of policy work. There are a number of policies related to this that will be reviewed over the course of the next couple of years. I don't quite recall where compensation is in the calendar of reviews, but when it does come up, this would be the moment to start having that conversation in a robust way. But at this point, the recommendations from the compensation study are what we're focusing on, with an understanding that there's just only so much capacity to change things at once, and that we'll need to take what we can do now to begin building and continue on from there. Does that answer your question, Chuck?
Yeah, and maybe, you know, maybe that's something we on the BAC side look at in the end of year report, as, you know, as we look at recommendations for, you know, the following year. You know, I think just continue to, you know, I think we've been pretty consistent about the sustainability of compensation, but certainly, you know, just from my financial planner hat in my day job, you know, inflation is a topic with many clients. And so I know, you know, our teachers certainly feel that as well, particularly in this area that is a bit higher cost.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel it personally. I know that our teachers we're trying to address the things that are in the compensation study for now, knowing that it is an imperfect solution, but it is going to get us in the right direction. And then, yeah, as part of the end of year report, I think the report always includes the recommendations to continue to refine the budget. And I think that you all feel like that is a prudent addition to that list. And sure, yeah, let's add it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Melanie?
Hi, and this question may be for both Leslie and Christina, and I think, Leslie, you started to talk about it. But I think, first of all, I think it's a great thing that we're addressing this compensation increase for the teachers. But I think we also were, those of us on the BAC last year and those of us who were watching the budget, and those of you who are very, very involved in the budget, know that although we feel very lucky this year to end with such a large closeout amount and to be looking at something that looks a little easier for next year, the deficits that were projected for the next 3 years were very large and very difficult to swallow, which means that a large increase like this to the budget probably does need to come with some trade-offs, which means with a budget that is 90% people, that probably means that in order to pay your base staff more, you probably need to think about how to reallocate or slim that staff if it's going to be sustainable with a budget that doesn't look like it works sustainably in the out years. So I don't know if you've done some thinking about how to approach that process. Not that you have all the answers, but would love to hear how you're thinking about how you're going to think through that process of really reevaluating the people side of this to make this work sustainably in the long term.
I can start. This actually came up during the compensation work session, but this year's budget is going to be tough because we are going to have to do exactly that, Melanie. We have 3 focuses for this year. We are doing compensation, we are focusing on math and literacy, we are focusing on operational strategic investments. So for example, the ERP and updating our systems so that we can operate more efficiently in the future. Those are our 3 priorities, and things that are not aligned with those 3 priorities may not make it. And so we're going to be making some very tough decisions. This is where we're going to be counting on you all to give us feedback on how to triage those tough decisions and how to address that, because we are going to be needing to look at everything and ensuring that we are able to focus on our 3 priorities. So,
okay.
Does that answer the question, Melanie?
It does. It's going to be tough, but at least it shows that unfortunately, and it is unfortunately, that is something we're going to address. But I appreciate that you're at least thinking about that, because I think nobody wants to do that, but also nobody wants to look at those kind of budget deficits, which are really scary and not something we want to do on a year-to-year basis, because that's even more painful. Thank you.
And I won't speak on behalf of all of my colleagues, but in previous conversations, we are all in agreement that these are the priorities. We established these as our budget priorities and the budget direction this year. We've had many robust conversations, both internally and at the dais and at work sessions, about these priorities and wanting to make sure that they are centered. So yes, it is going to be tough, and it is not going to be easy on anyone, but we're going to have to do it.
Thank you.
All right, Sal.
So I haven't read the compensation study. I'm looking at last year's, kind of skimming it through, seeing if I could find what I'm looking for. But I wanted to ask the question, when it comes to sort of looking at the sort of marketability shortfalls versus, peer systems, do you see any more acute variances between, say, high school on the upper level and elementary school on the lower level, just knowing that they're different educational models, and where you may have no choice but to raise compensation, you may have other sort of operational instructional model changes that could potentially mitigate the need to increase compensation. I wanted to just maybe hear how this all shakes out across the different types of educational models in the system.
I wish that I were qualified to answer that question, Sal. I honestly don't know, because I'm not aware. I don't work in HR, so I don't know where we had shortages in particular areas versus other areas. I think that's what you were asking about. I may have misunderstood the question.
Shortages or compensation and competitive pressures. I think of an elementary school teacher and the need to have an instructional model that's competitive with the market in an elementary school very differently than, say, high schools. And so I just wanted to understand, more about where this pain is really being felt.
And when you say instructional model, what are you thinking about? What are you imagining when you say that?
I'm imagining, ways that kids in high school and older kids can scale with sort of more technology enhanced learning environments as opposed to kids in elementary schools. I think we've all sort of witnessed older kids do better online, younger kids do worse online. I think it's my sort of simplistic, layman's observation, and wanting to know if this can sort of address, even to Melanie's point, can this address, some of the long-term planning around compensation as opposed to raising everyone's salary across the board, which I'm not averse to, but I want to know if there's a way around that.
Yeah, I wish I could answer that question. I just don't have any idea.
Okay.
It's just not my wheelhouse.
Christina, any thoughts on that?
I think that would be more appropriate for Bridget Loft, and so I also don't feel equipped to answer that question at this point. Apologies.
Okay. No worries.
Michael?
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you everybody for this discussion tonight. It's been really enlightening and helpful, especially as we approach the whole budget season. So thank you for all your work on this, everyone. I'm actually going to try to go along a similar line to Sal. So if it's an unanswerable question, please don't feel worried about saying that you can't answer it. But basically, we spent a lot of time talking about the substitutes and the lack of supply and those candidates and everything. And so I kind of wanted, as a former substitute myself, I really appreciate that discussion, but I want to bring it back to teachers in general. Are we seeing a lot of, and Josh, you can jump in on this too, are we seeing a lot of people leaving the district from our teaching staff? And if so, also, are we seeing a lot of people come in for regular teaching jobs? Are we, what's the balance on that? When we're talking about a younger staff, are we seeing a lot of new staff coming in? Is there a lot of demand to come to this? How competitive are we in the market? It's kind of what I'm trying to get at already.
I mean, I can give anecdotal. Leslie might be able to give far more detailed. I mean, the compensation study sort of addresses the fact that in a lot of areas, we weren't very competitive. And I would say the average age is probably trending down in Arlington. It used to be at one time, they used to be very proud to say I remember sitting in a meeting years ago that we'd say we wouldn't hire a teacher with less than 15 years or 12 years experience. We always the joke was they'd go somewhere else, get trained, and come to Arlington. And I don't think that that's necessarily the trend anymore. And that's my observation. I'm going to turn it over to Leslie for probably the better detailed answer.
I have a more detailed answer, but I do know that for the first time in some time, we report to the Wavy Guide our average teacher salary. So that's, basically all teacher salaries added up, divided by the number of teachers. So if you have a more mature, experienced workforce, your average teacher salary is higher. And if it's a younger workforce, it's lower. And our average teacher salary went down for the first time in a number of years this year. So that could signal that there is a trend of people leaving and younger people moving in, or the hiring of younger people, such that the turnover that our employee workforce will start to turn over. You'll see a lot more turnover. But yes, we're not very competitive right now.
Yeah, and I get that from a compensation standpoint. Again, from the financial numbers, what defines competitive versus not. I guess what I'm just curious about is, again, you may all not have the answer, so I'm just throwing this out there to the group to consider. If we're trending younger, again, are those people who are possibly leaving older, again, with the pandemic and everything, are they leaving because of retirement? Are they leaving because they're done teaching? Are they leaving for I don't hate to call them competitors, but competitors within private schools and other local school districts and going to them or are they again just leaving education altogether? And these new people coming in, are we seeing a dip now? Are we seeing a growth? Like, I just want to see where we stand and how much it is kind of bring in that new talent. Are we actually doing that already? What's that look like? Again, those kind of numbers I think will help understand the compensation itself a little bit better. But if we don't have those, that's kind of what I'm just wondering if we know where to get those.
We don't have those in a public format, but kind of speaking at a high level, our turnover numbers look roughly proportional to how they do in terms of the reason for turnover. It's roughly proportional to what it does in a normal year. You have folks who leave the profession for professional reasons. You also have folks who leave for personal reasons. Folks get married or have babies or to move to different locations or take a different position elsewhere or get a promotion to teach or to be an administrator in a different school district. That happens throughout the year. We certainly saw a bit of an increase in folks leaving due to COVID concerns when we shifted to fully in person in the fall, but that basically tapered off at when school actually got started. And then since then, it looks like any normal year. It is just the reality of there's no backfill. There's no pool to backfill from. And so as our hiring might be slower than we normally would because we just don't have that work. Does that answer your question?
It did. And thank you all of you, Josh and Leslie and everyone, Christina, for all that. Thank you. It's very helpful. Appreciate it.
Jennifer?
Yeah, just curious for whomever, maybe longer time participants, or Leslie or whomever, how does the revenue sharing agreement with the county fit into these longer term problems? And the reason why I'm asking this question is not to avoid hard choices. I get that the hard choices may have to be made over the longer term, but what I've sort of heard from a few different places now is, and I haven't had a chance to look, is that compared to the other Washington area boards of education, that our revenue sharing with the county is less generous than some other districts. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't had a chance to look at that. And so I'm kind of curious how that revenue sharing agreement fits into this piece as we look forward into the future, recognizing, yes, choices have to be made, but, yeah.
Well, first, we don't have a revenue sharing agreement with the county. We don't have anything signed and on paper right now. We share revenue with them as a practice, as we have in the past, but we used to have a formal agreement that was signed by both parties every year, and we don't have that and haven't had that in a while. But gosh darn it, I've lost my train of thought again. What was the second part of your question, Jennifer? I'm sorry.
Muted. I've heard, and just curious, like, is it the case that our revenue sharing with the county is less generous than other areas?
Right. So
localities.
Also in the WABE guide, it's on our website, on the budget and finance website. They do look at what the school disbursements are versus versus the total county budget. And if you look at that, we do have a lower percentage of overall county revenue than other school districts. But by the same token, we have a lower percentage of the overall county population in the public schools. So we're, somewhere around 20% plus or minus, could be a little bit higher, somewhere between 20 and 25%, whereas a Fairfax County, for example, or a Loudoun County has 50, 60% of their population that are in the public schools. So yes, they get a much larger percentage of the overall county revenue. So I think you can look at that one statistic and say, oh my God, Arlington's not giving us any money compared to what Fairfax and Loudoun are, but then we have to look at what's the why, and the why is we don't have the same number of our citizens, residents who are in the public schools. I hope that helps.
Thanks.
Are there other questions or comments concerning the compensation study? Okay, seeing none, go back on the agenda. I skipped the liaison groups. So before we get to that, or the liaison reports, just wanted to thank Leslie for those two. These are petty issues, and particularly I know compensation has been ground that's been plowed for a few years now. So, to see it finally kind of come into fruition, it hasn't been a very simple process. So, appreciate the work that goes into that. I think I would have just, echo Melanie's comments that, particularly for the members that, are going to go through this for the first time starting next month. When you look at these out-year deficits, just something that we all need to collectively consider, just the impact of any of these decisions as they play out into the future. And while I know we're going to get a lot of surplus back, uncertainty does cut both ways. And so we have to just be mindful of how this plays out over the long haul, because, again, when you look at a $60 to $100 million deficit, there's not a lot of creativity at that point when you get to deficits of that size. So just ask everyone to keep that in mind. With that, from our liaisons who work with some of the other committees, anything important for the group that you feel everyone should be aware of based on the meetings that you guys are attending? I know, Michael, you sent something out. If you could go ahead and speak to that, please.
Yeah, and I spoke about it on our last December meeting, and I just kind of followed up with all the information in the email. I can go into more details about how some of the topics with the ACTL Council on teaching and learning has been going in regards to budget specifically. I think I got a question back on that already. So I'll follow up with that. But basically, all the information's there in one simple email. Hopefully, it's easy for anyone to digest who's interested. And again, I'll follow up with more specifics to budget-related things before our next meeting.
Okay. Other liaisons?
Chuck, due to illness, I was unable to attend Josh's last ATCC meeting. Josh, is there anything that you would like to report?
Just that the county is leaning into restarting the fare pilot for kids to ride the art bus to school and back for no cost to the students. They're starting with a pilot of, I think, 2,400 kids before they expand it further. I think one of their biggest concerns is, should it become wildly successful, that like our yellow bus fleet, the green bus fleet is finite, but the hope is we can better utilize all of the transit vehicles in Arlington to shepherd kids around. So that's probably the biggest thing with a budget impact for now.
Okay, no, appreciate it. As we look ahead to next month, after I have a meeting next Wednesday with the special education chair, you'll probably look to get them to present to us just sort of where their thoughts are and what unique concerns they have. We didn't get a lot of detail tonight in our meeting with Dr. Cannon, but it did raise some interest in the level of resources that we would want to consider with our special education children. And so, that may be something, we look at on the February docket, really our last meeting to get smart on any other key areas before we then dive into presentation of the budget, and then obviously the work that we'll have as a group to provide our advice around the 23 budget. Couple things I'll note looking at the February agenda. One is, we just talked about with the special education piece, but then the enrollment projection, really taking a look at that, because that'll obviously kind of set the table both now and into the future about the level of resources that we need for our system. And so, that report is due later this month, so it'll be an opportune time for us to kind of get a glimpse of what the demographers and the folks that put that work together. One, the methodology, how they look at how we project our enrollment, but then more importantly, what trends are they seeing, and how does that shape the future for our budget? So that'll be kind of a key piece for us to take into consideration when we look at class sizes, future infrastructure, and some of these heavier topics. So be our last shot at a couple of key topics before the superintendent presents their budget. Is that, Leslie, which date should we be looking for that in February?
Looking for the report?
Yeah, the budget delivery. It's usually the last.
February 24th is when the superintendent proposes.
All right, so we'll have when we look ahead to March, we'll probably have about 10 to 14 days, depending on the timing of our first meeting in March. So one thing we'll finish up the February meeting with is a discussion about how to prioritize your work, getting through pretty hefty document, but just some of the things, either those of us who've done this a few years, but also from Christina's view and Leslie's view about ways to kind of look at it and get smart on the makeup of the budget before we begin discussing it in March. So some of this will be, we won't really know what our work might even look like until we actually see the budget presentation, in terms of, are we coming up with a methodology to look at cuts? Are we kind of sanding off rough edges? We won't really know until we see it. So, we'll just kind of have to see how that goes. And then, once we see the budget presentation, we'll have an idea of what type of environment we're in, where, what type of work has to be done to formulate our report that that I'll end up having to present probably in May to the school board, sort of our summary of conclusions. Any questions on what next month may look like? Okay, appreciate everyone's time tonight, and the discussion and presentations. Compensation is obviously incredibly important. It's been a topic of interest in my time on the BAC. So in some sense, to see this come to a bit of conclusion with, how, our teachers are going to get some compensation increases that, have been unevenly applied over the years. I think it's a good thing to see this work come to the fore, and, we can kind of look ahead to other issues. But with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second the motion.
All right. All opposed? Do a little bit of curveball there. All right. Look forward to seeing everybody next month. And again, thanks everyone for your time and attention tonight.
Thank you, Cip.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you, Leslie.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you all.
Thanks.